Today we are going to be making a shoulder cannon, but a bow for my Predator cosplay armor. This is part 3 of the Predator cosplay armor build video. I'm not sure how many parts I'll break this up into, maybe 4, and do a 4th one for the abdominal piece that's going to look like the actual Predator skin that'll go underneath that. But today we're going to focus on this. This was a pretty complicated piece, to be quite honest. It took almost as long for me to make this as all this. Of course, this isn't painted and weathered or anything yet. I'll do that in the next video. But this was still pretty cool. I was really happy with the way it came out, considering that it's all foam and I have no budget. So, okay, let's go ahead and jump right into the build. Alright, so I have the 2 main disc patterns, which are going to be for the side pieces here. And I went and cut some circles into them, and you can see that this hasn't come out the greatest. This looks kind of bad, actually. Probably going to put this one on the inside, where you're not going to see it because the dreadlocks are up against it. This one here is finished and does look a lot better, but it's still definitely not perfect. 6 attempts. Out of 6 attempts, I trashed 4 of them, and I kept these 2. So to cut the circles, what I did was, many times over and over and over, was I used some circular objects like this as a guide, and then ran my X-Acto knife around it. And I used a spray paint can for the one in the middle, and then for the very center one I just used this little tube. Bam, done. Once I was done with that, I heated it, and I used this Death Star speaker, which is probably not the best choice, because if this breaks I'm going to be sad, but I heated up the back side pretty heavily, and then pressed on the front side and got it rounded out. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And what I'm going to use as the center for these 2 caps is going to be this tape roll. This is from some painter's tape. I am going to cover this with a strip of 5mm EVA foam, and I am going to trace out that shape so that you don't have to try to go out and find the exact size cardboard tube. That's a little ridiculous. I don't expect you to do that if you purchase the pattern set, or if you're using it from Facebook. If you're computer savvy enough to do that, then I'm going to trace out, or I have already in the pattern set traced out this, covered with 5mm EVA foam circles that size. That way you can follow along with this and have the same size pieces so that all your patterns match up. I'm just doing this to make it lighter and save some time. Okay, and this pattern piece, shoulder cannon circular center that I got off this, is finished product is 1.5 inches wide. So if you have 1/2 inch foam mats, you can cut out 3 of these, stack them up, and it'll be the same size as this. Now these I planned on being somewhat bigger. They're actually smaller than what I anticipated after I heated and shaped them. But yeah, these outer circular pattern pieces that I heated and shaped shrunk up quite a bit. But I still have some excess to cut off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this directly in the center of this, and then I'm just going to trim off the excess with a pair of scissors. Alright, now that I have both sides on here, I'm going to take my Dremel and sand and round and integrate this so it flows smoothly from this into this. I use my rotary tool to round down these edges that were all ugly from me cutting them up. I used a medium grit sanding head, and I usually run it at around a little bit under 20,000 RPM. And next, I'm going to start figuring out the tube that is going to be coming off this for the actual cannon part of the plasma cannon. Okay, so this is going to need to be mounted onto a tube first before I start gluing on any pattern pieces. And if you can see here, it's pretty much going to be mounted onto the tube right near the bottom of your circular piece here. If it's sitting flat on a table, it's going to mount up just like that. So you can see that I cut this side to match the curve of this. And this other end down here, I gave kind of an angled cut with a bump in this curve. You can just cut a straight angle. You can do whatever you want. I just saw some of the photos and for the different plasma cannons and happened to like that design and shape. So I did go with that. And initially I was going to use PVC pipe, but here's the thing. This is going to have to be mounted up onto the shoulder. I don't want it to be pulling over my cosplay for being too heavy. I don't want to have to put it too tight either because I won't be able to move about in the armor itself. So I want all this to be as light as possible. I'm going to use foam for all this, but I decided to use this cardboard tube, and I cut it at 10¼ inches. I don't know how well you can see that, but it just goes a little bit past 10. 10¼ is the length, and that's from the bottom to the bottom. That's not for the top angled pieces. That's measuring from the longest end of the tube to the longest end of the tube on the bottom. So next, before I glue this on, I want to cover this in some EVA foam, and I'm going to use 3mm EVA craft foam to cover this. Okay, I have my foam cut out here. I am including this in the patterns. It'll be labeled shoulder cannon barrel wrap, and that'll give you an exact idea of just exactly how I did the cuts in this barrel. If you're interested in going that route, of course you can always cut your barrel however length and whatever you want with it. And just to give you an exact measurement of size here, this is 1.5 inches, this cardboard tube that I'm using. Bam, as long as you get something with an outer diameter that's similar to what you see on here, should work out just fine. Once you wrap it in foam, whether it's cardboard tube, PVC, whatever you want to use. Some random tube you have laying around your house. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and glue this on, and I'm going to use contact cement to attach this all the way down. Okay, so I went and glued this on. You'll notice I put the seam here on the bottom so that I don't have to worry about covering it up, because all these bottom pieces are going to cut it up. I am going to use an X-Acto knife and cut some lines in here based off of reference photos that I've been saving to my phone of different plasma caster shoulder cannons that I happen to like. And just for sake of reference and staying consistent with the last 2 videos, all the 3mm EVA foam is going to be green. The black and white is going to be the 5mm, just in case you get confused or mixed up. I don't know if I pointed this out in the last 2 videos, part 1 and part 2 of this build, but I am keeping the foam colors consistent throughout it. The only one that kind of fluctuates really a whole lot is the 2mm, which I ended up using red and pink and a couple different colors. Alright, next I've taken my X-Acto knife, have this fancy schmancy curved blade on it. You don't necessarily need this for doing straight lines, but it does help if you're doing curves. It doesn't make it all that much easier. As you can see, my circles didn't come out perfect, and I used this, and I had a guide, but all this I did freehand, and I just cut in some lines based on a reference photo. The majority of this is going to be covered, so you're only going to see these lines peeking out here and there, so don't worry so much if they're perfect. As you can see, I did not. I did all this freehand, put them all in there. And of course the bottom where I didn't glue it very well, and you can see that gap, but that gap is going to be covered. What that gap is going to be covered by is the shoulder cannon front base plate, which is this rectangle piece here in the patterns, and the shoulder cannon rear base plate. And then we also have the top plate, number 1, which is the big one, and number 2, which is the small one. And how these are going to attach, these are going to be the base for all the other pattern pieces to glue over. And these, of course, are going to be on the bottom. And this large rectangle and the square are going to be on the top. And all the pattern pieces are going to wrap around and meet up with these and be glued onto this. Now, they look just like rectangles, and yeah, they are. But you'll notice that this one is cut straight, or as straight as I can get. But on the edge, I got this curve here, okay? And that curve I put in with a Dremel so it can match up with this. Same with this other piece. The edges are straight, but this back end here has somewhat of a curve that I cut into it so that it can match up with this cylindrical part here. And on the bottom pieces, first I cut them at an angle, but I used my Dremel to round them off on this 1/2 inch thick EVA foam mat. And on the bottom of this EVA foam mat, you'll notice there's a texture. And I hand sanded that. And to get these smooth and even, I hand sanded them to get this nice shape into it. I used a Dremel on the edge here and here to get a nice straight angle, but on this rounded side, I did hand sand that. So yeah, even though I have the power tools, I don't always use them. Same with the front piece. And the reason why I have this curve here is because the bottom pieces I want to curve up around, and on the top, you'll notice the edges are flat and straight. And that's because the top is squared off on the one I'm designing and the bottom is rounded, if that makes sense. You don't have to round it, I suppose, but my patterns aren't going to quite fit right if you don't cut your 1/2 inch thick EVA foam mat at an angle at least, whether you sand it or not. It's meant to wrap around and attach, so it may not fit. You may have to extend them, make them a little bit longer. Alright, I have contact cemented on all the pieces respectively. And the next pieces that I'm cutting out of 3mm EVA foam is the front barrel shroud and the rear barrel shroud, which is going to wrap around here and get glued on, essentially like that, on the front and the back. Okay, I have the rear barrel shroud and the front barrel shroud contact cemented on. Now, the points of contact that are completely direct, of course, are on the bottoms here and on the sides of your bottom plates, your base plates. In between there is some dead space, like right in here, where there's no contact surface. That's fine. As long as you get it straight and even and nice and flush here. And to get this lined up and glued on, I started with these 2 points, made sure everything was straight and even, and then just rolled it around, starting with the bottom here, and then the sides, and then pushing on these edges and making sure all this was flush and flat. Now for the front, it was a little bit different, a little more complicated. Same similar process, line this up in the back and the front, and then work the sides up, but there's actually nowhere to attach these flared edges, and I knew this going in. There's a very quick and easy and simple solution that doesn't require a pattern piece or a whole lot of thought, which I just took a scrap piece of 5mm EVA foam. You can see I've already stuck one in here. I didn't even bother to contact cement it. I just used some everyday average super glue, nothing special, and super glued that piece in. And next I'm going to super glue this one in over on this side over here, just so it's got a little bit of stability. Okay, now that this has been shored up, if you remember the top plate number 2 piece, which was for this one here, well, you're going to cut out another one, except this time you're not going to use the thick foam. You're going to use the 5mm EVA foam, the craft foam. And I already have a piece cut out here. And instead of putting it sideways like this, I'm going to turn it this way, so it's going lengthways. And that's going to get glued right in the center. And the reason why I didn't put this on with these other 2 pieces was because I knew this wasn't going to make contact from the start, and I wanted to be able to shore this up ahead of time. That way I had space to work, and then I could just add this in afterwards. And this piece is a little bit wider, I think, than I want. Yeah, it's a little bit wider, by a millimeter or so. And that's because, if you'll notice, for the shoulder cannon top plate, this piece right here, the front, which is labeled front, is slightly slimmer than the back, so it does angle down some. Next I have the front barrel shroud number 2 pattern piece, and you'll notice it looks similar to number 1, but there is 2 holes cut out in it, and those black slashes up there are just to remind me to put some vent holes in this before I actually glue it on. I have not glued it on yet. I'm going to put some cuts into it with an X-Acto knife and heat it. These center holes I did cut out with an X-Acto knife. They're not perfect. I'm not perfect. And when it should line up, these V's should line up on both sides, but there should be a gap and a little sawtooth pattern created by the offset on the front and the back, if that makes sense. But these V's on the bottom should be lined up when you glue it on. Okay, I got the number 2 piece glued on, and I crudely kind of drew in here with a Sharpie just so I wouldn't put contact cement here, because I am possibly going to carve something in here later and heat it to expand it. It is of note that I did not use the heat gun on this until this was glued on. Once it was glued on, I made my cuts first, and once it was glued on, I used the heat gun, which caused them to open up on both sides. Now we're going to move on to the rear barrel shroud. Right, next I've taken the rear barrel shroud piece number 2 and I've glued it on. And there's not much to note about this one except the point of reference. I made sure that these points, much like on the other ones, were lined up, and that's how I lined up the piece. It is supposed to underlap here, or overlap, or whatever. It's supposed to be offset. On here as well, you should have offset, but it should match up with your corners pretty well here. And what you're going to see here is piece number 3 and piece number 4. On this side, I've already glued it together, but to show you it in its two pieces, this is piece number 3. I took my X-Acto knife, put some hash marks in it, and then used my heat gun to blast it with some heat, which caused those to expand. Then I will then glue 4 over this, just like on the other one, and glue this on the side. Okay, so next I started adding on some of these round pieces. I did 8 of these and 4 of these, which to get this inner circle, you can tell the outer circle I cut, it definitely ain't perfect. I also heated and shaped it to try to get it as round as possible. But how I did this, I did not use an X-Acto knife. What I did was I used this rivet here and used that to cut it out. Now I don't have an exact size on this, so I can show you the outer and inner diameter. But I didn't buy this, I scavenged it like so many other things. And didn't really know why at the time, thought I'd put on a lightsaber or something. But actually what I ended up using it for is to cut out little circles in the foam. I just press it in, apply some gruntwork pressure, and you can then cut out, or have a cutout of your circle, which is nice and perfectly round. So when you put it on here, it'll look pretty dope. Except for over here where I can't cut so good. But that's still not terrible, it ain't bad. This one not so great, but luckily this will be on the inside. This will be on the outside, which is the nicer side. So yeah, that's how I'm going to decorate some of the little round buttons, knobs, and other things. Is cheating, or being innovative, or scabby, whatever. Next, I'm going to put on the front barrel shroud top accent piece. It's pretty easy to identify in the patterns. There's not much really to it. But I will note that if you'll notice, this is cut at an angle, so that when I place it on, it will be slightly offset from this front edge of the front barrel shroud piece number 1. So it's going to be glued there and attached on the side to here. And I cut it angled on the front, the top, the back, but the bottom, of course, I left flat so that it would be able to glue to the base of this. And did the same thing as well for the opposite side here. Cut them on angles as well. Now, to achieve these angles, I had to take my X-Acto knife and cut inwards along the edges so they came out looking nice. So I wasn't going to apply contact cement to these. I realized that the one on the right side of this, I actually ended up cutting all 4 edges at an angle, which I just said not to do. I said cut the longest bottom edge flat. That's okay. I just cut another one. If you're wondering why I'm filming a mess up, it's to show you that everybody does mess up. Don't get discouraged by it. Foam is usually pretty cheap, so if you screw something up, never hesitate to do it again, get it right, so everything looks consistent. Okay, so what I have here is some contact cement on what is the rear barrel shroud upper accent piece. And on this side, I did 3 swooping cuts, and then 2 go in the opposite direction. You can do whatever you want. I just saw this in the reference photo, so that's what I try to replicate. I've already applied some contact cement to here, and also to the the plasma caster as well. And to do that, I just use my X-Acto knife here, and I put a few cuts like that, going in that direction, and then 3 cuts starting at the corner, and didn't quite go all the way through, in this direction. Next, what I'll do to get them to open up and look like this, I will heat them with the heat gun that I have. And there we go. I now have this glued onto there. I'll go ahead and apply contact cement to the back of this after I run the heat gun over it and glue it on the opposing side. The next piece I put on is the circular rear top attachment piece. That's how it's labeled in the patterns. And it's just a rectangle of 3mm craft foam, but I did take my X-Acto knife and I took it and put cuts through here. And then heated those cuts with the heat gun to help them spread out and look nice, just like I did on all these other pieces. And the other piece after that is the rear barrel shroud upper accent top. Okay, which is a little rectangle with a little notch in it to fit up against this. And I glued on the one side, but I wanted to show you here on the second side. I have not glued it on yet for purposes of demonstration. The little notch, of course, goes here, which you're going to notice. When I cut this with the X-Acto knife, I cut it at an angle on the top and the bottom, so that the bottom will match up flush here, and the top will match up flush on the top. Alright, so next what I have here is the top plate 1 and 2 filler. Piece number 1, piece number 2. The larger piece is 5mm EVA foam, which I cut and then glued standing lengthways, essentially this way, and the wider part this way. And the 5mm is this way. And in the front is the smaller one. I did take my heat gun and heat these and just kind of round them over a little bit. And what's going to go over that is the top plate 1 and 2 bridge. And that will be glued 5mm distance from this piece here, and it will roll down over this and fit flat on the front, just like that. Alright, I glued down my bridge piece, and then I took some 3mm EVA foam and just cut a couple little triangles, just kind of close off this open space here. No pattern for that, and I took some of the same pink 2mm EVA foam that I used for the bridge, and I used that to just make a little piece there so it had a little more balance looking at it. And after that, I took a regular old US dime and just pressed it into some foam and cut out a circle. And next I have some O-rings and other things that I have got at places like Lowe's, etc. for Nerf gun repairs or to make lightsabers. I'm going to use some super glue and glue this around that with a little bit of border around it. Okay, I took some small zip ties and I cut them to length, to the same length. The middle one is slightly shorter, and I put 2 cuts following them, plus these other cuts with the X-Acto knife, which I then heated with a heat gun. And these other pieces are just some 3mm foam that I had lying around, that I already had cut and heated actually. I didn't actually make these, I just had this stuff lying around. But I just originally cut it and made it for Darth Vader lightsaber repair, but did not like the look of it at the time, so I ended up just throwing it in my scrap pile and saving it. And back here is a piece of 5mm EVA foam, which is 1 inch wide by 1/2 inch. All the edges are cut straight, except of course for this backside edge here, which I cut on a bias to kind of make a stop for whatever the heck that's supposed to be. Alright, so lastly I carved some design into the foam here. And once I got all the design carved in, I went and stuck a thumbtack in here just for the heck of it. Cut out a couple little squares, glued them offset with 4 dots. No real reason. Now the inside of this, I don't think I'm going to put much of anything on. Simply because the way it sits, you're not really going to see it. I'm probably going to carve some stuff into it, but man, I just botched this. I could have kept doing it. I guess I could have done 2 dozen of these until I got one that looked as good as this side, but I just didn't. Shame on me, I guess. But yeah, I think this is pretty much it. Until I seal and paint this is pretty much it. Okay, so the next issue becomes, how exactly do I want to attach this? Now, several things. If you're a Predator fan and you've been watching all these videos leading up to this, or I've been making this, you've heard me talk about, or just from visual identifiers, this isn't anything based 100% off of anything in any Predator canon. There's elements of each thing that I kind of threw in this to an extent, and even then kind of did my own thing. And for one thing, this part is usually elevated up a little higher, actually, and comes up further. And
when I mount this, I want it relatively high, but I don't want it too high. I don't want it like way up here. And some of the different versions I've looked up just through Google searches are quite up here. They're almost, some of them are almost up higher than the actual Yautja's helmet, which is pretty crazy. But I don't want to put mine that high, and I want something sturdy and lightweight. And I considered making it out of foam. Foam is going to be very stiff. What's going to happen is it's going to flop over. So what I have here is a Zuru X-Shot Hawkeye. This is the old model. The new model looks different and has like a recoil stock in it or something goofy, but you can usually find these pretty cheap. It's a single shot break action blaster, and if you recognize this, it is this piece right here with the stock butt sawed off, and it is detachable from the actual blaster. And the stock looks like this. It's totally useless. It's too small to be used as a stock, but it is extremely lightweight and sturdy. So, in my mind, I was thinking using this for the actual base of the plasma caster shoulder cannon, if that makes sense. I think that would be a lightweight, strong, durable way to actually mount this. And it doesn't look bad either whenever it's on there. So I'm going to go ahead and sand and begin to prep this.
Okay, so in order to get this to match up to here, it's not even because of these pieces. I was sanding to even all this out. I already went ahead and sawed this off, and to saw it off, all I used was a regular old hacksaw. Honestly, I probably could have just used the Dremel cutting attachment, but it just throws so much stuff at me. So many little pieces of plastic. I, of course, wear eye protection and something to cover my mouth so I don't inhale any particles. But it just throws stuff everywhere. It gets on my face, my hair. It's not as bad sanding as cutting. Cutting, you just get these long little wisps of plastic that just kind of fly up and hit you. But I need this nice and even so that I can glue it onto here. However, I'm going to be masking this off and masking this off whenever I paint the two. This will be joined to the armor, and then this will be joined to that once the armor is fully painted. Okay, so I have sanded down the top here with the Dremel, and I've also taken a sanding block sanding sponge and roughed up the whole entire surface of it, because all the plastic pieces and such will be vinyl dye primered prior to me actually plasti dipping them, just so the plasti dip hopefully will adhere a little bit better. And I also ground down this side too, because this area here is where it's going to be glued onto the side of the actual Predator armor. Next, I'm going to take a Sharpie, and I'm going to trace around here where it's going to be attached so that I can get a nice trace and mask that off with some painting tape, so that whenever I seal this, I don't get any sealant in the foam, because I want the foam plain where it's going to be glued together.
Okay, so I've gone ahead and glued this on using some regular old everyday household super glue. And of course that was the side that I sanded down with the Dremel so it would match up better. And it's pretty solid, but I don't 100% trust it. Just because of the cannon and the weight and heat and the costume and walking around a convention, I don't want this to come off. So I've taken some quick set epoxy. It comes in 2 tubes. You have to put equal parts and then mix them together for 20 seconds. I've already gone ahead and done this. And now what I'm going to do is taking small amounts of epoxy on my little wooden spreader here. I'm going to go through and begin to just let that drip down along this seam here where I have already super glued it on. This is going to help form an extra sturdy, firm, stiff layer of protection once it hardens, which usually takes, for a full cure, I believe is around 24 hours. But in about 5 minutes or so, the stuff starts to set. And once it starts to set, it's really, really hard to spread. So I try to get as much done as quickly as possible before the epoxy starts to harden. Once it starts to harden, you will make a huge mess trying to do this.
Okay, so with repeated applications of the epoxy over about a 20-minute period, just mixing up small batches, I'm going to go all around the top where it's sealed, in the front, and also here in the back. And I left this gap here. I'm not going to fill. The gap is intentional. It serves two purposes. One, it makes it look like it's only attached to this. And two, I want it to look like it's separate. You know, like it would actually be something that would move or slide forward or back or do something other than just be fixed statically in place, which of course it is. But that gap also allowed me space so that I could take and drizzle epoxy down on the inside as well. Right now I'm going to seal this using some Plasti Dip that I picked up at Lowe's. You can find this stuff at a lot of different places, including AutoZone and I mean pretty much everywhere, or some equivalent. I think Rust-Oleum makes some sort of competitor product to this now. This stuff's pretty simple, just like spray paint. You just give it even coats, even wet coats. A little bit wetter looking, I suppose, than spray paint, but you can just go easy. Just start layering it on. I guess my only personal gripe with the Plasti Dip is sometimes I can't get in all the nooks and crannies. But if that happens, I just go back through with a brush and some Mod Podge and use that to seal any areas where I just couldn't quite get this all the way in. Which does happen, but it is so much easier and quicker than having to sit here and do the whole entire thing with a brush and some Mod Podge. So yeah, I'm just going to continue doing that until it is fully coated and it's ready to go. Alright, so I have repeated the process of applying Plasti Dip to this, and at this point it has been 48 hours, and I've put several coats on this. I usually wait at least 6 to 8 hours for the coat to dry. Now out here in the summertime where I live, it is a dry, non-humid environment, and it gets very hot. So not so much the heat, but the utter lack of moisture in the air will really cause these to dry out a little bit quicker. And as hot as it is right now, I put a coat on about every 4 hours. But if it was more humid or just a little cooler, I probably wouldn't do that. So keep those things in mind anytime you read. You know, there's certain things that I've painted when it's been rainy out here. It wasn't rainy when I painted it, but as soon as I had spray painted it, it was rainy. And it said wait 48 hours until you apply a second coat. I waited probably around, I think it was 51 I had estimated, and the coat that I put over it still cracked, because when it gets humid, things just don't dry. So keep that in mind. Now, next, what I'm going to do is, if you ever notice, Plasti Dip kind of has like this tacky stickiness to it, and even when you spray paint on it, spray paint just kind of seems to lay on top of it, so to speak, and it still kind of has that feel, but I found a way to alleviate that somewhat, and that is to use Duplicolor, vinyl, and fabric specialty coating. If you watched my Han Solo Blaster video, this I mainly use on like plastics, mold-injected plastics, like toy guns, Nerf guns, etc. It doesn't so much paint the Nerf gun, it literally dyes the plastic. But it also gives a nice, flat surface that holds paint really well, whether it's spray paint or acrylics from Airbrush or anything like that. So I'm going to use that next, and just like before, I'm going to go ahead and mount it on my pole, and I'm going to paint this. The only area I'm not going to bother to paint is the inside of the barrel, which I of course had to take off of its pole here to Plasti Dip finally, and that I'm not going to. But the outside, yes, I'm going to go ahead and put a nice coat of this over it. Okay, I've allowed for the vinyl dye primer to dry, and it is very flat and has a very dry surface now. It's no longer that sticky, tacky rubber feel, and it should be great for absorbing all the paint that I'm about to airbrush onto it. So the vinyl dye primer does dry relatively quickly, and with something like Plasti Dip, in an hour or so you can probably paint on it. If you're doing a mold injected plastic like Nerf guns or something, I would wait at least 24 hours to give it a full cure. But we're not doing that. And what I'm going to do next is I mix together some createx opaque black with some Mod Podge that I thin down with water, and some Windex so it'll dry a little bit faster. And now I'm going to go ahead and spray that on. The reason why I put the Mod Podge in it is it gives it a nice gloss color. The opaque black from createx is not glossy. Alright, now that the gloss black is all dried, I'm going to use some Wicked Colors Wicked Silver through my airbrush. And this stuff I'm just going to gradually layer on over the black. You want some of the black showing through. Too much silver, it looks cheesy. Not enough, it doesn't look quite metallic. All that's kind of up to your own personal opinion, though. Okay, and just like that, until I get round about the depth that I want. And you'll notice the way the light hits it. When the light's not there, it looks darker. When the light hits it, it looks a little shinier. In certain areas I will highlight, like I've already started spraying specifically this cut area right through here, and also this centerpiece back through here, and this other little tab that is extending off the back here. Alright, now that it is all done, I am next going to take some Treehouse Studios clear acrylic gloss coating, and I'm going to go ahead and spray this down to give it a nice finish and seal all this paint in. Alrighty, so that pretty much wraps it up for this. If you want to check out some more detailed photos and some better images, you can always follow me on Instagram, and also just watch the progress of these builds, because it does take a while to finish everything, film the intro, outro, edit everything, and get it all done. And of course, in the next video, I will be painting and weathering this, ultimately ending with attaching this, hopefully by the end of the video. I also have all the Velcro and stuff that I'll need on this, so I can at least try it on as is. I did make this a little bit bigger than me because, like I said, I'm going to have a artificial set of Yautja abs that I'm going to make to go along with my Predator outfit, which needs to fit under this. So keep that in mind anytime I do any trying on, that there's a lot of other pieces to this cosplay. And since this was not a request, and it is a full cosplay build, and I am starting it early enough, unlike Star-Lord, you'll actually get to see me make most or all of the stuff in videos. Whether or not you're interested in that, I don't know. But that's the cosplay I'm wearing in a few months, in October actually, so I need to get it done. And I got an eye infection, which unfortunately kind of slowed this down. I don't know if you guys can tell, but my eyes were not looking so good. Still a little red, still a little puffy, but it did slow down getting this done. But I did still get it done, and we'll still have the video out like I planned. Don't worry, I won't be doing just Predator. I am going to be breaking it up with a PlayerUnknown's Battleground helmet that I'm doing for an exchange with a fellow YouTuber and Twitch streamer. This guy is really cool. Once I get that done, he's supposed to help and collaborate on the video as well, which will be really, really cool. So I'm pretty excited for that. Also going to work on a few other things in between. I have a Venom commission, which may or may not film, but I do have to do. It'll be different from the original Venom mask in the fact that the jaw is going to hopefully move. As in when the person goes like this, opens their mouth, the jaw should go down and up and down and close. So I may do a video on that just so you guys have a different concept and a different idea for a Venom mask. Other than the two I've already done, first one was okay but not great, second one much better. Despite the fact that I didn't think it's great, I still didn't take down the video. The video's still up there, so if you want to check out the old Venom mask or the new one and haven't, feel free to. And that commission in particular is going to be for Instagram user that goes by Pretty and Violent Cosplay. You should check them out. He has an awesome shredder, Deathstroke, and his family cosplays too as well. Some great stuff like Splinter. You should definitely go check him out on Instagram. I'm pretty stoked to get this done. I guess his family is going to do a Venom-themed Halloween and a Venom-themed haunted house or something at their house for trick-or-treaters this year. So hopefully he'll send some pictures or some video or something for that I can check out. So yeah, definitely go and check out Pretty and Violent Cosplay on Instagram. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate each and every one of the new subscribers. You guys are all awesome. Props to anybody that leaves comments, particularly helpful ones. I really appreciate that. You know who you are. And as always, I want you guys to have a great day.